came back, you hit it how you said, like, no, I will return to the image, and I will talk about craft as stylistic traits, which I thought was really great. In writing about Jim's work, bad painting, my first swipe at it for the Valerie Carberry show, I was trying to frame it in relationship to bad painting. And the question that I always had in looking at Bad Painting was a show mounted by Marcia Tucker at the New Museum in 1970, 78, 77, 78. No, it's not 72. It's definitely not 72. It's either 70. It's 78. It's either 77 or 78. It's definitely not 72. But the Bad Painting show, and I was always curious, like, why was Chicago overlooked for the Bad Painting show? You know, and then I arrived at the conclusion, it's like, well, the painting actually was kind of too good. You know, when you look at the finish on it, it's like, no, it was all good painting. You know, so I think that spoke to that. Chuck, in picking up on one of the things that you said, I thought it was beautiful that you picked up on Jim's statement that Chicago granted him permission. Yeah. You know, and he did at one point say he chose Chicago over New York. He didn't want as an alternative to a dominant center, you know, and that it would be a place that would allow him to pursue a very personal practice in a way. You know, to think about, I don't want to go somewhere where I'm going to plug into international. I want to figure out what it is that I have to say, me specifically, which is great. And to round it out, since Paul, you were the last one, the issue of heterogeneity is what I guess I'd take as the point of agreement between us rather than of discord in that way. Just trying to think. I don't know who the J.C. Hurd, is that who the critic you cited was?
Jacobson. J.Z. Jacobson.
Yeah,
Jacobson. Who I'm not.
J.Z. Jacobson.
He was an art critic of the 20s and 30s.
Oh.
1920s.
I'll send you his tome.
Yes.
And he wrote a book that's in libraries somewhere.
That'd be great. Because I always need some schooling when it comes to Chicago regional art history. So with that, I hope we could just have a conversation amongst ourselves up here first before turning it open to the audience.
Yeah, I would actually just like to mention something, as you just used the very important word, which kind of slipped my mind because it was very involved with the Jeff Koons project of whenever that was, this past summer, I guess. It seems like 100 years ago. The word personal, and that's what Jeff Koons kept citing about why he wanted to come to Chicago and study with the classical imagists like Jim Nutt and those people, because they had personal iconography. They were able to not have to have that person over their shoulder saying this is what you do and what you don't do. And I think maybe that is another defining characteristic that people like Jim quoted, and what we've all said here today, that it gives you permission to explore and do what you want to do without having to fit into some mold of what the greater authority is saying you have to do.
Yeah, and I think that contributes when we talk about it as as heterogeneous. When you name all these, a different list of 10 artists, you think about them as like, oh yeah, Karen's work is Karen's work. Oh Judy's. You don't. There's no camp. There's no school that they fit into. You actually do recognize them as individuals and their own particular practice.
Is part of that the fact that we don't have a dominant gallery scene where you're trying to fit into a commercial? It seems like a very positive panel here about Chicago art.
Well,
we all live here.
And once I get my Chicago Art Bureau.
Well, there's a former gallerist on the panel, and I guess you're sort of a former gallerist, art person. But I have to say, I've never experienced this in Chicago galleries, but when I travel around the world, I mean, I'm always shocked, or I'm doing a studio visit with a very well-known artist and their dealer is there. Their dealer is telling them what to do, what kind of work to produce, what materials to use, in front of me, a curator. And I've never seen that happen in Chicago. I don't know if it does or not. Maybe you artists can testify. But it does seem like that the very high-powered dealers know what their clients want and often encourage the artist to create that. And that's another kind of aspect of the international art world that maybe few of us have had to personally experience. I hope none of you artists have. But does seem to be a factor in creating a very homogeneous, I think, international kind of art practice.
There are a lot of artists in Chicago, clearly, but so I think about, like, what does the title Chicago artist mean, and what good does that do you if you're not in Chicago? If you're trying to exhibit in New York, Los Angeles, anywhere else, like, is being labeled a Chicago artist helpful in some way? Does it make you exotic? Does it make people more interested? Does it, like, what good does it do outside of Chicago? And so, like, you know, it was interesting, like, Chuck's idea of having a card that you need to apply for. I'm not going to apply. Like, I mean, unless it's getting me health insurance or something. Like, what does being a card-carrying Chicago artist, like, do for you?
Yeah, because, I mean, what I'm saying is we're not there yet, but what it should do for you is say, oh my God, you're from, you know, you're from that tradition, and that gives you a boost up.
Well, I think that it has a lot to do with this issue of possibility too. Like, there's a lot of possibility in Chicago, and in order for the designation Chicago artist to be extraordinarily meaningful, positively or negatively, I think that there's a lot of possibility for sort of a generation of critical voices to sort of emerge from Chicago, talking about Chicago. And should that critical voice strike a chord nationally or internationally, then it'll be meaningful in that way. I mean, I think that up until, like you were saying, you don't want to be reduced to a Chicago artist. I think maybe at this point right now that's the overall sentiment, is that being called a Chicago artist doesn't necessarily give you a positive edge. Maybe it doesn't give you a negative one either, but it's not something people are dying to be called. But I do think that with the heterogeneity of practice and with all the interesting things happening here, that should someone or a few group of people be able to verbalize what it is that's happening here in a way that's interesting to the art world, the art universe, then the term Chicago artist could be really valuable. You would be dying to be a card carrier.
Do you have any idea how we get there? Because, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's part of that.
I'm not convinced we want to get there.
You're right. What?
I'm not convinced we want to get there.
Where?
You know, I think if you have a label that says I'm a Chicago artist, it's about as meaningful as a label that says this label doesn't mean anything.
Well, I don't think, finally the label won't probably say Chicago artist. The bumper sticker was imagist. I mean, if you to have a bumper sticker is not a bad thing.
That's them for your wholesale.
Yeah. But I mean, so that there's some kind of, you know, recognition that there's that's a shorthand, so people will understand where you're coming from, what you're involved in.
Exactly, but I think what you're involved in is a diversity, so that it probably denies any particular involvement.
That's true.
But it could, I mean, it could kind of give people a sense that you're kind of a...
You're an aberrant thinker, or you're unique, or you work, probably you work hard.
Yeah. Or you work hard. You know, I think that there's something about Chicago that lacks pretentiousness, and I think that that's the work ethic, the lack of pretentiousness, I think, is a valuable thing. So. But
I mean, if you like it here, it's going to be a plus, and if you don't like it here, you're going to make it. You're going to couch it in negative terms. You know, it's cold.
It snows a lot.
But it's interesting. One of the things in having this panel, the issue of the second city complex, that I think Philip, you may have mentioned, you know, this conversation. Does this conversation go on in Portland? Does it go on in San Francisco?